Now, if you're part of my Facebook group, so that's Sharon's Innovations group, you'll already know what design I'm going to create today. Now, I've asked a few questions. What other designs would you like to see? Is there anything that you'd like me to revisit? And I believe it was Margaret. So hello, Margaret. Margaret asked me if I would do a modern mass design. So I know a modern mass as an Italian mass, and that's what we're going to look at today. So you might be asking what exactly an Italian or a modern mass is. So a modern mass is a design that is really bold and quite striking, where the flowers are grouped together and blocked in colours rather than spread out evenly throughout the flower arrangement. There is no space at all in between the flowers, and the container is an integral part of the design and an important feature. Now, as a commercial florist, I rarely create the Italian or the modern mass, and it is called a modern mass, although it's been with us for a very long time, so I'm not really sure whether it would fall under the modern category. So the Italian mass, or the modern mass as it's called, is a design that I rarely create as a commercial florist because it needs a really good, heavy, striking container, and they're often heavy to carry from the shop to a customer. And they also contain a vast quantity of flowers. You have to have large heads in large quantities. You can have a contrasting colour combination or a harmonising one. It's a design that's really good for interpretive work. It's fantastic in competitions. It can look really striking in a window display, or if you need to do some display work to attract attention, then this is a really good design to do. Now, ideally, the colour of the container should replicate the flower colour choice, and that's probably the area that I'm lacking in a bit today. Even though I have reds and greens in my container, it probably would have been better for me if I'd have had a red or a terracotta coloured container, because the container is an important integral part of the design and it should really all blend together quite naturally. But I love this container and it reminds me of Italy, so I thought it was a good one to show you today. And it's a really heavy base, lots of texture on it, and I thought it would be a fantastic addition to today's flowers. Now, when I asked for suggestions for today's arrangement, my plan was to do something for St. George's Day. I'm not quite sure whether we're going to have time to film and edit it before St. George's Day, but my original inspiration was this gorgeous red rose, and this one is called Explorer, and that's going to feature in my arrangement today. Now, you might be able to tell on the top of my container here, I have quite a lot of old floral tape. And the reason that I've left it on is because each time I use this container, and I use this a lot when I do Flower Club demonstrations, if I was removing the tape each time I use the container, then I would be taking off this decorative layer from the top. So I've decided to leave it on. At the moment it looks quite ugly, but by the time I've finished, it's going to be completely hidden. I've also got a container that I don't think we've used before. This is another Oasis base. It's a clear plastic dish and it sits really comfortably on the top of my container and it's not going to move around. I've got quite a large piece of floral foam because I've lots of flowers to get in. But if you haven't got a container like this, you would maybe want to consider filling your container with old floral foam or some sand, and then you could wedge a piece of floral foam in the top there. I tried a few different types of containers before I selected the clear plastic one. This one didn't quite sit on the top, it wasn't firm enough. I also tried just an ordinary side plate and a saucer, but it was sliding around and wasn't quite secure enough. And I did also try this little container, which I often use when I'm using a tall container. But again, I felt it was a bit small and wasn't going to hold enough floral foam. So you might find that when you're learning flower arranging, you need to practice with different sizes of containers before you find the right one to use. Now, I'm going to use some formium leaves to give me the line coming out at the side. And they've almost got a curved shape to them. So if I just pick up one to show you, they're almost bending down naturally. So that's almost dictated the shape and the style my arrangement is going to be. So with a modern mass, or an Italian mass, you could go vertical, diagonal, or horizontal. So mine is aimed at being horizontal, but because there's a little bit of diagonal movement in my formium, I think my design is going to be almost a diagonal horizontal, if there's such a thing. But you can see it curves beautifully. Even if I try and put it in a severe horizontal position, there's still a little bend and movement in it. So sometimes you have to look at your flower material and then decide which way it's naturally forming. And for me, it's definitely a bit of a diagonal. So this is my first placement. And remember that the emphasis on this design is texture and colour, blocking and grouping. The rhythm in this design is created by big blocks of colour. Right, so we're going to cut the leaf down a bit shorter because it's going to be far too long using it as it is. And I've cut that at a diagonal so there's less material going into the foam. So you might have noticed with the floral foam, I'm using it on the side. So I've got the bigger sections to place my formium leaves into. And then I've got the smaller section to cover with my large clusters of flowers. I'm just going to take a little of the side off of the leaf because it's touching where my tape is. And I can't quite decide whether I'm going to go left or right, but I am going to go to my left. Now, because I'm right-handed, my natural way is to arrange to my right, but this leaf looks much nicer arranged to my left-hand side. So I'm going to go backwards, so I'm really challenging myself today. It's not the natural way of me arranging. Now I've got another of the formium leaves. And this time I'm going to thin it out because I don't want two very heavy leaves on one side. I'm going to thin it out, and this is going to sit quite comfortably on the top of my first leaf, but so we've got layers happening. We've got that terraced sort of effect there on the side, and my eye then is being drawn into the centre. We don't want to finish this section here at a severe point. You need your eye to glide away quite nicely towards the end. Then what I'm going to do is to add one more leaf on that side as well, so that we have a group of three, which is often far more pleasing than a group of two. And I can use the warmth of my hand just to help that leaf curve more elegantly onto the longer side. And that's my first placements in. What I now need to do is to balance the visual weight onto this side. And what I'm going to use there is some garden foliage. And I'm going to use these gorgeous Bergenia leaves or elephant ears that you might have growing in the garden. And this is going to counterbalance the weight of the design on this side. So it's almost like an asymmetrical design to start. Now I have three of the Bergenia, and I'm in the back of my floral foam here, remembering that clean cut on the bottom so that your flower material and your leaves will take up water. And I'm grouping them together, blocking them really close together so we have that really vibrant pop of colour. So quite interesting so far. Now what I didn't mention at the very beginning was not only can you have flowers and foliage in your floral design, but you can also add that third element of fruit or vegetables. And this design always looks good with the addition of grouped fruits and vegetables. And today, to give me some downward movement in the design, I've decided to use some grapes. Now it could be big large peppers, they work really well. It could be dried seed heads, it could be bunches of herbs. But what I've done there is I've wired the top section onto quite a heavy gauge wire because it needs to hold the weight. So the grapes are quite heavy, and without that extra wire, the bunch is just going to keep sliding out of my floral foam. So what I'm going to do here is insert another wire, and I'm going to try and get it all the way through the foam so that it hooks onto the plastic container there at the back. And then by adding it, then by clipping it onto the container at the back, I know I've got that extra support. And in fact, what I've done is I've just looped it there at the back of the floral foam. You can just see it in this section here, and hopefully that won't pull forward. So I've got a lovely textured bunch of grapes there at the front, a slightly darker red, so we're looking at those tints, tones and shades of my colour, and that I think really brings in that Italian feel to the design. Now I've got a slightly smaller bunch which isn't quite so heavy, and that should sit closer to the foam on the top. So I now have a really big display of cascading fruit down over the front. Isn't that lovely? Great design. And as I said in the beginning, a really good design to create impact and drama and contrast in a room. Right, let's start with the flowers. Now, if we were doing a semi-crescent flower design, we would start bringing the flowers in a line from this position here. But we're not going to do that with the flowers. The emphasis is going to be towards the centre here. And we don't have a traditional focal point, but we'll have several places of interest created from the different plant material that I've got today. Because the line of the formium leaves out to the left is quite strong, it's quite a powerful visual line, I'm going to introduce some twigs and some branches because I think this is going to give me a little bit of more natural movement. It's not going to be quite so severe and drawing your eye away from the design. So we're going to introduce, these are just some branches that I've collected again while I've been out for a walk. It's a bit of a darker colour, it's a reddish colour brown, so it does link really well with a bunch of grapes. So just a few, and then it really stops that line material on the outside becoming too severe. And then what I'm also going to do is continue it up this way, so your eye is drawn right the way through the middle and up on the opposite side. So now I'm going to find a piece that's the right shape, and I think this one is going to look quite nice. So I'm going to bring this in between my leaves, and we've got a lovely bit of movement from one side to the other. So we are creating a bit of rhythm in some line material, but I'm not making it too traditional, I suppose is the right word to use. Now it comes time to add those big clusters there in the middle. And I'm going to start with a carnation. I've got a beautiful big red carnation. These are nice and fresh, and they've been sitting in water so they get nice and plump. And if you haven't used this technique before, you can use your finger and thumb just to fluff out the carnation so that the head is a little bit more open. And what I'm going to do with these is put them all together in a group so that the emphasis is on this bright red colour rather than the individual flower type. So far, I've just got 3 in. And the aim is that that looks like one big flower rather than 3 individual heads. So nice bit of drama happening there. Beautiful, beautiful colour. Now my grapes match really well with my container because I've got some reddish purple colours going on in the base. But my red carnations are probably a bit too vibrant for my container. But never mind, it's still going to be a beautiful arrangement. Had I thought about this design before I asked you on the Facebook group what would we like to do, I probably would have gone with colours that were more in keeping with the container, but it doesn't matter. So big vibrant selection there of carnations, really grouped together. And it's important in this style of arranging that you pick a round form. It doesn't work if you have daffodils or a spray rose or a spray carnation. They have to be big, bold flowers. Protea are amazing if you're in parts of the world where you've got protea. They could be, this could be an artichoke, could be an anthurium. But remember, big, bold is the name of the game today. Now my next flower I think is going to be the Gerbera. So again, you've probably guessed it, I've got a gorgeous red Gerbera. And these are going to get grouped alongside my grapes on the opposite side. And what I've tried to consider in my mind is the contrasts of the flowers alongside one another. So if we think about the shape of the flowers as very similar, the shape of the Gerbera and the carnation is round, but the texture is different and the colour is slightly different. Not a huge contrast in the colour. Maybe I could have gone with a more burgundy shade of Gerbera, but this is going to work quite well. All right, so let's get that group together. At the moment I've got 3 flowers, 4th one going in now, and I'll turn that round for you to see how that's coming together. So again, I'm trying to make that one big flower head rather than having lots of different small flower types throughout the arrangement. And I maybe will add another one on the opposite side, but we leave it as it is for a moment. And you can see, like my description at the very beginning, there's no space in between the flowers. So when we're doing traditional flower arranging, we encourage you to leave negative space between the flowers. And we often say leave space for the bees and the butterflies to fly through. In this type of design, as the word says, it's a mass design, so the flowers are close together. There is no negative space, only what we call positive space, where there is something filling the gap. So positive space is when there's an item, negative space is when there's nothing there. Right, so let's now move on to the rose, and then we look at adding in some foliage. I'm going to cut the rose down quite short again. I don't want any foliage on there. And this time I'm going to come above the two flower types. And there's a beautiful contrast now in shape. The rose, of course, almost, even though it's still a round shape, it has much more dimension to it. So the carnation is quite flat, the gerbera is quite flat, but we have far more three-dimensional quality with the rose. And this one I've chosen to come at the back because it's going to show off that form, that three-dimensional form, better than the carnation and the gerbera would. Okay, so let's carry on with that cluster at the back. With this design, you've really got to think about the materials that you're using. It's not the design that you can sort of rush out and buy any types of flowers. You really have to think of the individual sizes of the heads, the shape of the heads, and how the colours are going to work. Possibly easier to do in the autumn where you have some big chrysanthemum blooms, you might have hydrangeas in the garden, you might have dried some allium seed head, but really planning and thinking of this design beforehand is what's quite important. Just slightly moved a few of the gerberas because I wanted to get some foliage in underneath, so I've lifted them up slightly higher, but I'm sure you can appreciate how those round dominant shapes are coming together, those clusters and those groups of the different types of material. Now in this area under here where I've left a gap, I have a gorgeous Dracaena. You might have seen me use this before. They come in a variegated green and white as well as this lovely red colouring. And I'm just going to take them a bit shorter so that we can create that clustered effect here at the very front. Now if this is your first tutorial, welcome. My name is Sharon and I've got a whole host of tutorials here on YouTube. And we've also now got a private Facebook group. So if you want to join us, it's an area where you can discuss flower arranging, ask questions, talk to like-minded friends in a nice, safe environment. So you'll find me on Facebook, Sharon Dowers Innovations Group, and it's a private group, so you will have to answer 3 questions so that I know you're a genuine person and you're not a robot. Now I've decided that I'm just going to move the piece of bark to the back because it's hiding one of my leaves, and I think that's going to be a better option. But you can see now I need some greenery in this section here to hide that foam there, and then I have this love of the more tropical Dracaena leaves. And if I keep coming round the back, we've still got foam to cover at the back, but I'm going to do that with different types of greenery. And in this section here, I'm going to introduce some Photinia Red Robin. So you might be familiar with this. There's a blaze of red colour from it at the moment. It's looking really quite spectacular. And I'm also, rather than wasting the foliage, I'm going to use the bottom section, which is that lovely green, and I'm going to use this on the opposite side. So just like the foliage, I'm putting it in blocks and groups. I'm not spreading it out in that traditional manner. I'm making those really vibrant clusters with the material. When you're placing the material in, try and get the placements to look like they're one group rather than individual flowers put in the foam. Get them close together so you get that lovely massed and grouped effect. Okay, now we'll turn it back round so I can see how it's coming together. So for me, we're going to fill in this area here, and I have a foliage for that area that has more texture to it. So it's going to contrast really well against the Bergenia leaf at the back. This one is called Cryptomeria, isn't that gorgeous? And it has beautiful branching material, so that would be ideal to use in a crescent. And in the autumn and the winter, if the frost hits it, it turns this beautiful shade of red. And what I'm going to do, again, cut some low down pieces. It's going to give me a beautiful contrast in texture. So we have that very smooth Bergenia leaf, and we have the very smooth grapes at the front. And this bunchy, fluffy material is going to contrast really well and separate off the groups and make them more visually dominant. So again, I'm making sure that I'm bringing enough material down low here on the side so that I'm covering that plastic tape as well, because we need to hide all our mechanics. But can you see there the contrast between the two and how well that works together? So I'm going to use that at the back as well. We've got plenty of it. It's going to give lovely textural quality to the back of the design. And because it has a bit of movement and it's slightly bending forward, it's going to be great for covering my tape as well. Just like the flowers, it goes in a group and a cluster. We don't spread it out and intersperse it between the different types of flowers. So if we look at the back, I've covered one whole section with the Cryptomeria. Now I just need to add a contrasting material in here. And because this is very fussy, I need to maybe consider a flatter leaf. And I really need to consider a different colour green so we have contrast against the Bergenia leaf there on the side. So a good choice is going to be the rhododendron, and it's a completely different colour to the Bergenia leaf. Even though the texture is quite similar, the colour is different. So we're going to get that contrast that I need. And it's very different in its texture, its shape and its colour to the material that's alongside it. So we get that really good contrast. And that's what's important in this design, is creating that contrast. Good lesson in the principles and elements of design. And I think the back there is pretty much finished. Now my thoughts at the moment are this area here is a little flat. We don't have anything that leads your eye up to this top section here. We have that real dominant focal section in the middle, but not enough in this section here to continue your eye to the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some more of this lovely decorative bark, but this time higher up here at the back. I feel like there's almost a space here that needs filling in. I don't need a huge amount, it's just so that we have some depth and your eye is brought towards the back. It almost seemed as if it was quite flat in that area there. And now, because I've added in the material a bit higher, I almost feel that I have to lower this section down because the line of the material isn't working quite well. So what I'm going to do with this first placement is move it to the side a bit. And you'll find this in floral design. Sometimes you can add one single flower in and it almost changes the whole shape of the arrangement. So what I'm now going to do is pop it in there at the side, and it almost now looks like this branch is coming right the way through the centre in that diagonal movement through the middle. So I'm hoping you've enjoyed that one. So I'm hoping, Margaret, I've done you proud. This was on your request and I hope I've explained it clearly to you. So a modern mass, or an Italian mass, very different from traditional flower arranging, but I hope you've enjoyed. Thanks so much for coming back and watching. I look forward to seeing you all again very soon, and goodbye for now.